Everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, and welcome to another very special video. This one previewing the Sword Dancer and the Personal Ensign. Big races on Friday and Saturday, and joining me will be Acacia Clement. But before we get to her, make sure to press that like button here on NYRA Bets YouTube and subscribe to our NYRA Bets YouTube channel to get all of our great content, whether it is race previews like this one, full card analyses, whether it's the Travers Spotlight videos, racing live streams, or handicapping and betting tutorials. We got you covered for racing around the country and around the world on NYRA Bets. So, like I said, we have a big weekend this weekend, Travers on Saturday, but it is a loaded field of 5 grade 1 races on that card. One of those is the Sword Dancer, which we'll get to in a second, and the other on Friday is the Personal Ensign. And here to join me is Acacia Clement from NYRA. And Acacia, thank you so much for coming on and talking about these two really fun races with me.
Thanks for having me, Matthew. Your background definitely looks a lot nicer than mine. So I appreciate the lovely branding and all of the hard work that you've been doing with the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. There's like new content every time I turn around. It's amazing.
We try. We're just kind of cranking out that. By the way, if I turn my laptop more than a centimeter either direction, the background looks completely different. It's chaos around me, but at least right behind me, it looks good. So, yeah, huge weekend and some really big fields. And we'll dive right into it with the Personal Ensign, which is on Friday. And this is a grade 1, of course, for the 4-year-old and up fillies and mares going 1 1/8 miles on the dirt, a field of 5. But you talk about the right 5 horses to be in this race. I mean, this is an incredible group. And I wanted to start, Acacia, by talking a little bit about the morning line favorite, Idiomatic, a horse that I think a lot of us assumed might be the dominant horse in this division, but the last 2 times out, 1 loss, and probably should have lost last time out to Soul of an Angel, who kind of got the jump a little bit in that race. Talk a little bit about, your thoughts on Idiomatic and, whether or not that last race maybe took a lot out of her coming into this spot for the Personal Ensign.
It's interesting because I actually just interviewed Brad Cox after he won the first race with the 2-year-old today and asked him about Idiomatic and what he'd seen from her. And he said that her last 2 works were spectacular. And he said, I know that some people are concerned that she's lost a step back this year, but from what she's been showing recently, it doesn't give me any inclination that she shouldn't be up to the same level of what she was last year. Look, I know that she was soundly defeated 2 starts back. Last time out, she nearly lost it as well. I hope that Florent Geroux is not going to make the same mistakes that we saw in the last couple of races, especially with Randomized being drawn to her outside. Randomized has speed. Randomized is incredibly talented as well. They kind of duked it out in the Breeders' Cup. And so what I'm kind of assuming will be the case is that we're going to see kind of a Breeders' Cup-esque run that Randomized will send, and then we're going to see Idiomatic kind of just on her hip. And we'll see if they're able to go that way down to the wire, if Idiomatic is able to outgame her at the end. But you can't let Randomized get too comfortable alone on the front end like we saw happen in the Ogden Phipps. She's just too good for that to happen. Look, I hope we see a spectacular performance from the 2 of them. I hope they're duking it out down to the wire because it's great races and it's kind of a rivalry, and rivalry makes it fun in racing. So, we love to see that as well. But Idiomatic's got to prove it. I'm a huge fan of hers. I really, really hope that she does, and hope that she's able to turn things around and show what we know is in there. She's run triple-digit buyer speed figures, and Randomized hasn't.
Yeah, it's so interesting because on paper, you're right. Randomized is the clear speed in this race. Idiomatic's really the only other option to press her in any way, shape, or form. There's really nobody else who's going to send, I don't think, or has that natural speed to get up there to press Randomized. And you're right. I mean, when she gets out there on the front end, she's very tough to track down, maybe a little bit reminiscent of a horse like Dornick that we'll see this weekend in the Travers, just a horse that's really stubborn on the front end and hard to get by when he gets out there. And yeah, it's interesting. Florent Geroux, the last couple of times out, I thought was maybe a little too overconfident with how he handled her in the Ogden Phipps. I mean, just really feeling confident to go 3-4 wide around both turns. And I just felt like that saved ground obviously made up a lot of difference at the end. And then last time, Irad Ortiz Jr. Quite frankly startled him, I think, in the Molly picture, making that early move with Soul of an Angel and getting in front of him. And one of the things that I think is important to point out is Idiomatic, when you see her, is a big horse, and
Mhm.
she's not the sort of quick twitch type of horse. She takes a while to really get her best stride unfurled. And so when all of a sudden Soul of an Angel came up, it was like all of a sudden it turned into a 4 furlong sprint, really, the last stretch. And that's it's not really Idiomatic's game. And
Mhm.
so it was all class that really helped her prevail at the end of that race. But like I said, I can't wait to see these two duke it out coming down the stretch. One of the other horses I'd like to mention is the other Chad Brown horse in this race, Raging Sea, who I think probably is maybe a half a step below the top two, but has turned into a really nice horse in her own right with a couple of big wins this year in her campaign. Obviously the way the pace dynamics play out, the size of the field maybe is not setting up for her, but presumably she might be sitting in that third position, kind of behind Idiomatic and Randomized.
Yes, she certainly could be. Yes, she's improved. She's definitely gotten better. She's run some nice races. I just think that she's not quite as good as the other two we mentioned. She may not even be as good as Soul of an Angel. I mean, don't forget, Soul
Yeah.
of an Angel beat Randomized pretty soundly in the Ruffian and nearly beat Idiomatic in the Molly Pitcher. So she's a good mare in her own right.
Yeah.
I mean, Raging Sea, Flavien Prat just gave such a terrific ride to her last time, where Shotgun Hottie really didn't have the best ride or trip in that race in the Shuvi, and she's just going to be facing so much tougher in the Personal Ensign than what she faced in the Shuvi. So yes, she has taken a step forward. To me, I just don't think that she's quite good enough versus the other three that we mentioned, at least as of yet.
Yeah, and we should mention Soul of an Angel. You're absolutely right. That ruffian performance, very impressive. And then obviously we talked about the Molly pitcher and almost beating Idiomatic in that spot. I do wonder if a mile and an eighth is really kind of what she wants to do, but she is extremely talented and has Irad Ortiz Jr. staying aboard. And Safi Joseph has had a huge meet. I feel like every time I turn around, I see you interviewing Safi in the winner's circle for one of these races. So he's been turning out a lot of live runners in this race. And the long shot in this race, Jagera, is one for Phil Bauer, who also has had a really successful Saratoga meet. But another one who it's so interesting. Last year, it looked like she could be a big player in this division. The way she finished her 3-year-old season, she hasn't really discovered that form yet. Facing older, it's hard for me to think that she's going to suddenly rediscover some of that and improve in this spot. But there was such promise there last year when she switched from the turf to the dirt. It's just too bad it really hasn't played out this way this year.
She was so good for a short time, for a few months there, from kind of, the September through the end of November, when she was just on a tear. But coming back as a 4-year-old this year, she's just really been off form. Now, Scylla, who beat her in her last two, is going to cut back in distance and go to the ballerina. So it's just not her to deal with. But she is one that has some tactical speed as well, especially from the inside. And you mentioned just how well Phil's meet has been going. I would never discount a horse that he sends out, just because it really seems like he's really brought the right ones and put them in the right spot. But that being said, A, we know that she can handle a mile and an eighth. That's well within her wheelhouse. B, we know she has talent. The big question is that she's just really off form right now.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is going to be a fun race. And I agree with you. I think it's going to be a thrilling stretch run because Randomized is stubborn and Idiomatic is just so talented. And when you see her in person, she's just such an impressive animal. And can't wait to see this one on Friday as our feature race. But let's head to Saturday and let's head to the turf and talk about the grade 1 sword dancer going 1.5 miles for 3-year-olds and up. We're on the inner turf. This kicks off the late pick 5, which is the all grade 1 pick 5. And listen, I know the two Clement horses very well in this race. We're going to get to both of them, but this race runs through the two Appleby horses, Silver Knot and Measured Time. And Silver Knot, talk about a horse that's the opposite of Jagera, just has taken a massive step forward from 3 to 4 and set the track record last time out in the Bowling Green and just looks to be quite the horse. But Measured Time, another horse that's done very little wrong and coming off a win in the Manhattan. I think the 1.5 miles was a question mark, but how do you differentiate between these two really talented Charlie Appleby runners?
I think a lot of it will come down to trip. Silver Knot has been here in the U.S. for longer than Measured Time. And I think many, myself included, were questioning just really how good he was.
Yeah.
But he's gotten good in his last couple of races. He won the Man of War, which is still a crime that it's a grade 2, by the way, and no longer a grade 1. And then last time out, I mean, he was just marching around the paddock before the Bowling Green. And yes, it was the local prep for the Sword Dancer. And he was able to wire the field that day. He is a horse that we know that the distance isn't a problem. From what I understand, is that they kind of skipped the Bowling Green with Measured Time. We're actually planning on only running one of them here and the other in Kentucky, but hearing that it would be a short field, ended up running both of them. So I think it'll be really interesting as far as tactics, because Silver Knot used his speed last time out to his advantage, and Measured Time dragged William Buick to the front in the Manhattan last time out to set the pace. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what the two of them do as far as the pace is concerned, because you also you have Pioneering Spirit, who could be forward at one point. Grand Sonata was forward, not recently, but I think, the two kind of main speeds come from the same connections.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think for so many of us, we typically assume when we see William Buick come over, we go, that's the live Appleby runner. But it's hard to discount what Flavian Pratt's been doing on Silver Knot. It's perfect 3 for 3 this year. And a horse that, I like you, Acacia, I was a little skeptical of. I felt like early this season, I didn't really know how good he really was. I kind of played against him in a few spots, and he's just gotten better and better and better into this point. But it's going to be interesting to see, William Buick coming over and not being the top choice Appleby. I mean, that's pretty rare to see that. So it's going to be a really fun race. But there are two other horses, two Clement horses, Soldier Rising and Far Bridge. And we can start with Soldier Rising, who, you can make a lot of jokes about it, but this is a horse that runs really honest every single race, but a lot of runner-up finishes. And, we saw one last time out in the Bowling Green, but clearly has talent to hang with this group. 8-1 in the morning line, I think, is a very generous price, and has been just a model of consistency, really, in terms of buyer speed figures for the most part over the last year plus. So another horse that I think at a price, again, you have to think about a little bit.
Yeah, I know a lot of people love to take shots at him. There were a couple on Twitter after his last race that I thought were not kind, and calling a horse like Geopolitics the female Soldier Rising. She does not grade 1 place and does not have 1.35 million in the bank. Look, I know that he runs second a lot, but in large part that's because he's such a deep closer, and he's last early, and then you have a horse like Silver Knot who's setting the pace on the lead, and Soldier Rising is still able to close and get to second, just not able to reach that favorite. Look, I mean, I understand it's a frustration, especially if you've bet him a lot. He's not a horse, that kind of has that willingness to win, but he shows up every single time, and that's a lot more than a lot of other horses can say.
Absolutely. And I think it's also an important distinction to understand how to bet a horse like this. Listen, it's not as if he is a horse that hangs necessarily.
Yeah.
You're right. He's just the trip. It's not necessarily working out for the best all the time, coming from the back. You look, it's not as if he's second by a nose, second by a half a length, second by a head. He's second by 2 lengths, second by 4. So he's just losing to horses that maybe get a better trip, are up front, and are just superior, perhaps, losing to a horse like Warlike Goddess, or, other horses like that at different times. There's no disrespect in finishing second to those quality horses. So, I think, again, 8-1 is a really good price on a horse that you could use underneath in some exactas in this race. If you think maybe Silver Knot, same song, second verse, just gets out up front, is able to kind of do his thing. But yeah, I'd love to own a horse that earned 1.3 million on the track. So, yeah, that's a far cry from what Geopolitics is, for sure, at this point. So now the other Clement runner is Far Bridge. And I think this is an interesting horse who just had too many expectations. I really liked his campaign last year. And this year he's been facing obviously older and maybe a little bit tougher company, has had some good efforts, finished behind Measured Time and Nation's Pride two back in that Manhattan, coming off maybe a little bit of a disappointing effort in the United Nation. But that's a horse that had some talent and certainly has the pedigree of English Channel up top and a damn out of Kitten's Joy.
He is a horse that was really impacted by the draw in his last two races. Andy Sterling and I have talked about this a lot. He needs to run inside of horses. And so being 11 of 11 in the United Nations was about the worst possible case for him that you could have. He's a very, very tricky horse, a quirky horse to time it. And I mean, look, he ran, I thought, actually quite well 2 starts back. He was getting out a little bit on the turn in the Manhattan, and then Jose was able to duck down to the inside, and that's when he really kind of finished and was able to close inside of horses. It's just that's how he has to run. He wears that Houghton bit or cage bit because he can kind of run like you saw in the Turf Classic Derby weekend, kind of with his head turned out a little bit. It's just that's just kind of how he is, and so he being drawn, obviously it's a shorter field, but now in post 3, you're going to be able to get to the rail, kind of let him make his run. Hopefully he doesn't encounter much traffic, but that's just kind of what I think he's really been impacted by in his last couple of starts. And I know a couple of sharp handicappers who are really high on him to try and upset the Godolphin duo, and I certainly hope that they're right. But I really think that the draws in the last couple have been the biggest detriment to him being able to make his best run, because that's just kind of how he is. And when you have horses like that, we talk about it on the dirt. You look at a horse like Sierra Leone and kind of him sometimes getting in his own way, and it's not quite to that level, but it's just horses have their certain preferences, their certain quirks, and so you have to be able to kind of map out a race ideally where they're going to be able to put forth their best run. And where he's been drawn in his last couple of starts, I just don't think he's been able to do that.
Yeah, and listen, there's few better on the turf than Joel Rosario, and so he's going to make sure to give him the good ride. And it's one of those things I remember going back to his 3-year-old campaign. He is a horse, if you watch the replays, he does love not just traveling on the inside, because a lot of horses, I think, like being covered up on the rail, but then they might kick out come the top of the stretch. He actually likes making that move on the rail. He really does like going through on the inside, which you don't see all the time.
He does. And don't go and say, oh, they fired Jose. Jose has always ridden at Soldier Rising throughout.
Yes.
So, but I do think that Joel will fit Farbridge very well. He's the kind of rider that just will not get in a horse's way early, and I think that's what this horse really needs too. And so, like you said, he's hopefully going to be able. I mean, Joel loves closing up the inside as well, so it's kind of like a dream match for the two of them to hopefully get that trip.
Exactly. No, there are certain jockeys. Like I remember when Joel used to be on Clairiere, I was like, this is perfect. Just like make the big run at the end, and like that just fits him like a glove, and it fits her, and so it all works out. But I think a really interesting one. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything about Pioneering Spirit or Grand Sonata. I mean, those are 2 longer shots in this race for Linda Rice and Todd Pletcher. I think certainly not quite in the same caliber as the other 2, although Grand Sonata coming off a nice effort in that United Nations, but does seem to be sometimes a little uneven with, the performances. Obviously had a little bit of trouble 2 back in that Monmouth, the grade 3, had to be steadied late in that race. But again, kind of only one other effort at 1.5 miles and hasn't gotten the job done there. So didn't know if you thought either of those 2 maybe are able to hit the board and upset things a little bit.
Pioneering Spirit, kind of like we talked about with Kijera previously, he was a horse at one point that was in such good form, and then unfortunately just recently has been so off form that he's tough to trust. He ran second on the dirt, which is actually where he started his career last time out. But he's just tough for me to trust because he just has not been to the level of what we saw from him last summer when he put that string of good races together. As far as Grand Sonata, no, he's certainly not the most consistent, but I thought the pace really held together. I mean, Get Smokin' and Tawny Port were on the front end last time out in the United Nations, and Gran Canaria closed and nearly got the jump, and he was a big price that day. So he's one that I think runs, actually, even though he closed last time, I think he runs better when he's tactical and a little bit more forwardly placed. So he's a horse that sometimes does have the ability to take a little bit of a jump forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So it should be another really fun field. And, listen, even if you think the two favorites are the two favorites, it's still a really conundrum from a betting standpoint because you probably don't want to include both of these in your pick five because you just doubled the cost of your ticket. And so, just from a wagering standpoint, it adds a lot of intrigue. And if you think you can beat one of them, if you think you can beat both, if you like a horse like Farbridge or Soldier Rising, really could provide some opportunity for value in this race. Well, Acacia, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. And where are we going to see you this weekend on Travers Day? Are you going to be on set? Are you going to be in the paddock? Are you going to be everywhere? Where are you going to be?
No, I'll be reporting all day. We have our Fox Saratoga Saturday from 3 to 6, and I'll be on some races before that as well. It'll be a long weekend, but I'm really, really excited. This is really kind of the peak for us. It's a lot of fun and a lot of really, really good horses that we're going to get a chance to see this weekend.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I didn't ask you this ahead of time. Do you have a pick yet in the Travers or not?
I don't, to be honest.
It's okay.
I am still looking through it. I think it would be really fun if Torpedo Anna could get the win. I am a huge fan of hers. I think that she is incredibly talented and that she belongs in there against the boys. Yep. I think it's a great move, and Kenny's really open with everything that she's doing with her training and allowed us to have a really competitive Alabama last week as well. But I have to go through and look and just make sure I'm not completely leading with my heart. But it's a really, really good group, and it's a really fun matchup of truly the best 3-year-olds in training right now.
Totally agreed. I mean, from Fierceness to Dornoch to Sierra Leone to Torpedo Anna, I think some really exciting up-and-comers like Unmatched Wisdom and Corporate Power, Batten Down, who won the Ohio Derby. I mean, Honor Marie now gets the blinkers, and that's a horse that I feel like has always run into some bad luck on the track. So a great group of 8. We can't wait for it. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think I'm going to see a lot of pink on Saturday. I know that with a lot of the Torpedo Anna fans out there. And yeah, all credit to Ken McPeak for his openness and transparency with this whole process. He's given the fans what they want. And I will say I was out there in the paddock when she was schooling on Sunday. Man, she looks ready to race. She looks good. It was quite the, it was interesting because I was in the paddock for the Alabama, and it was so interesting to see how she looked compared to how the fillies looked in the Alabama. And that's no disrespect to that group at all. She just is built a little bit different than some of those other 3-year-old fillies.
She is for sure. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, no, exactly. So anyway, Acacia, thank you so much again. Really appreciate it. Make sure to check out Acacia on Saratoga Live this week. And thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube. For Acacia Clement, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.